Catherine Breillat is a great director. I think it's fair to say Catherine Breillat.
Supremely good director.
A French director, a woman, but doesn't feel any of the... doesn't seem to please feminist film critics much of the time with her kind of pronouncements. But yes, a real... In a class of her own, I feel Catherine Breillat. One of my favourite films is En vraie jeune fille, which I'm very glad is being restored at the moment. A kind of coming of age erotic film. Yes, because at the moment you can only get it on very dirty, sort of stained DVDs.
Oh, there's there's a ripped version. I saw like a really scuzzy ripped version of it.
Yeah,
it's good,
disgusting.
but it
so
needs
4K restoration is coming.
And we've also obviously got Fat Girl, Big Bitch,
Amasseur,
as it's been translated into English.
Amasseur, to use the French title. And she made various films.
Bluebeard, we've
got historical drama. She did Romance X, which is kind of like a sort of kink porno almost.
She's a sex person, basically. She's a sex and intimacy person.
That's one thing that keeps all of her films. The red thread that runs through all her films is a kind of fixation with the sexual. And last summer, L'été Dernier is no exception.
Nice.
She's now in her 80s. And
hasn't made a film since 2003. Since 2013. Yeah. So we've got like a 10-year hiatus.
Years.
She's jumping back on the horse through various personal travails in her life, and has.
She was hoodwinked. She was conned, and then she made a film about it. Anyway,
which was her last film.
Positive history of Catherine
Isabelle Hubert.
Positive history of the fantastic Catherine Breillat, and her new film last summer is a kind of family romance, shall we say? Tell us a bit about this film.
It's a family romance, as it were, like sort of talk about Irma, but with so it's a golden glossy tale of bourgeois success and contentment and dissatisfaction. The narrative really revolves around a bourgeois couple and the wife. So basically, the husband has a son from a former marriage. This son, who's been playing out at school, now comes home to roost. Basically, so his mum doesn't want anything to do with him anymore because he keeps getting kicked out of school. So it's up to dad to look after it. So he kind of enters this big palatial lawyery. He's like some sort of unspecified corporate, executive or something. Yeah. So he has a lot of money, and it's very, sort of gorgeous, large house. Everything's well oiled.
And she's a kind of girl boss lawyer.
She's a lawyer, who deals specifically, and this is very pointed. She deals specifically with abuse, child law.
The opening scene is her having a very sensitive conversation with a
young girl.
Who's been who she is.
She's interrogating this young girl, so basically
in order that she can adequately defend her against the defense.
Yeah, against the very critical defense that she believes will cast her as a slut and a whore. So what we then get is the introduction of this young boy, this young stud, basically into the...
he's a sort of curly, floppy-head indie boy, isn't he?
He is, but he's been released amongst horses, and so what we have is the introduction of this young boy, obviously with all of these... Are we going to spoil it?
We are now. Here we are. In order to talk in any meaningful way about this film, we have to say that it's about a man who fucks his stepmom.
Yeah, it's a guy that basically relives. It's kind of like a Pornhub category. This guy actually shags his mother-in-law, and it deals with the kind of
stepmom.
Stepmom.
Yeah. Wait, is that the same thing? No, mother-in-law is when you marry someone and the person and the mother of the person you're marrying.
It's stepmom.
So
there's not a blood tie there, but there is an ethical boundary, not only because of the age difference. He's 17 or so, and she's...
a delicious Freudian dynamic.
Exactly, yeah. So it's kind of the Oedipal kind of Oedipal complex, if you want to get into
the Oedipal Oedipal.
So we've got Oedipal Oedipal complex, and so an erotic, a romantic, and actually a very erotic relationship. This isn't rutting, and one of the things Catherine Breillat is very good at is shining a light on real erotics and the real...
her bedroom scenes are often her best scenes.
Yeah. And that's what we felt when we were watching it. I think that the film has this quality. So the sex scenes and the scenes of kind of flirtation and rizzing and the scenes of like everything from kissing to shagging are executed in this beautifully strange, both tender and very, I suppose, so naturalistic that they become quite surreal way. But the wider like cinematography and the way it's shot elsewhere felt kind of sloppy and second rate at times. Yeah.
So pedestrian that you wonder whether it's a stylistic choice. Like it really looks like an episode of Hollyoaks or something. You remember when when you're a child and your parents are waiting to watch Channel 4 News and there's some scene of someone throwing wine in someone's face, and it's all very long lens. And
for some of us, that was our real lived upbringing.
True.
Not me though, or you.
And yeah, it feels really odd, and it's only when about half an hour into the film when this kind of central transgression takes place and you realize that this is going to be the subject of the film that I guess some of that boringness feels kind of almost okay, because you're like, well, you know, what it's lacking in formal transgression, it's certainly making up for in content. I mean, it's genuinely
it's
like
shot with this kind of roving camera that sometimes was a little bit. The rovingness is fine, but I was trying to understand what the roving was establishing. Because a film typically like this,
aimless roving and weird, like washed out color, like it's like they just didn't expose it correctly.
Yeah, the exposure was a bit strange. But yeah, and when we get to these sex scenes, suddenly the blocking is really interesting because I think it's really what Catherine Breillat cares about is sex. It's the plot. Everything else is basically an excuse to get to.
And the sex scenes are long. They're like one take usually, continuous take rather than back and forth. I mean, you can't really do back and forth sex because it's next to each other. But you know, there's
the real shot reverse shot.
Maybe that's the reason she didn't do it. But like, it does have this amazing. This sense of duration suddenly enters the room where it normally doesn't in this film. Yeah. Which is strange because I think her earlier work, I mean, her best work has a some sense of deliberateness and control.
And it's often
regardless
shot, I think,
whether it's sex. I suppose even in Fat Girl, the most interesting scenes are the sexual
and
scenes.
And it often sometimes shot, there's a slight rovingness to them, but sometimes shot with a kind of static camera. There's something kind of Christian Petzoldian, I should say just Petzoldian about earlier cinema.
If you're wondering what the hell do we mean by Christian Petzoldian, we did a whole episode with friend of the show George Macbeth on Christian Petzold, the German filmmaker. Karen.
Yeah, there's a similar tendency to treat sort of charged scenes of a particular kind of fixed frame, or whatever, yada yada yada, that might kind of pan a little bit left and right. But with this, the actual blocking of these sex scenes is really interesting. The first kiss that they share is beautifully weird and seedy. We actually see the kiss very, very close up. The camera's right here, and we can kind of glimpse the fact he's watching like some sort of anime on his phone, on his mobile phone.
His mobile telephone.
And you can kind of see that kind of glimpsing in between their lips. There's the second kiss, so there's interesting mirroring in this film. There's a later kiss, which is much more fraught and intense because he actually falls for this woman. He falls for a stepmom because it's not his first sexual encounter, but it might be his first sort of meaningful, in a strange way, sexual encounter. And there he's drunk, she's sober, and it's this very desperate, sloppy, wet Frenchie, basically, and it's incredibly well shot. And there's two sex scenes. The first time we only see his face, really. We see a bit of her hair, and the second time we only see her face. So she's taking quite deliberate aesthetic and compositional strategies in how she represents.
It's tightly wound with all these like scenes of people not saying things or people trying to stop other people saying things. There's a lot of the film is spent in the sort of legalistic space of what can and can't be said, and it twists and turns in a genuinely exciting and unpredictable way. It does have that. I mean, it would be a good film to compare with Memory by Michel Franco, which we'll talk about hopefully in the next episode, which is also LFF. But it uses the transgression as a material in a very engaging way,
and finds a kind of interesting and novel way to depict it, and also finds a kind of shocking way to represent it, which is like, other filmmakers might choose to represent this transgression purely in an aggressive and sort of judgmental and condemning way. And she's removing her judgment from it and actually exploring the tenderness and the passion between these two people, kind of vacuuming out the ethical and legal considerations. The ethical and legal considerations sit around the film. They're the fat on the bone. Those, and we see these, obviously she's a lawyer, there's a duty of care, there's a kind of professional boundary she's crossed. But Catherine Breillat does a great job of just removing those things during the scenes themselves, and they're really tender and quite powerful scenes of eroticism and sex that I hate to say things like this, but no one's really doing it like that. When we saw, Emily Attef's film last year, which had these really overdone hyperdrive scenes. It dealt with a similar subject matter, which was an age-different sexual relationship, but they're
being kept a secret.
But there, she was approaching. It was almost the critique of young
sentimental and overdone. Whereas I think actually maybe this is the secret, at least behind her sex scenes. Is this kind of like very bare approach that allows you to kind of fill in the gaps, not with your imagination necessarily, because they're sometimes somewhat explicit, but like they don't overcode what you're watching, which I think is really important with Breillat. And it ultimately leaves you with this, like all good Breillat films, you leave the cinema feeling like you've woken up from a sex dream that you're not sure you should have had. It has a sort of weird, like a cuddling, but real sense of unease.
Yeah, it kind of takes, I suppose, the erotic into these interesting places, which is like where it should really exist. Is where they thrive, which is in this. The real transgression is, the real transgression is not the age difference or the relationship between them. It's actually the kind of way in which that relationship is brought to life and is actually shot, framed, blocked. I think really interesting. So, but
it's only shot, framed, and blocked well
during sex
3 times.
So put aside the rest of the film, and there's some annoying kind of like bits of like non-diegetic music that kind of slip in, which is a common refrain for us, where people just slap a bit of music into a film just to add something which
it's weirdly normie and then suddenly not normie at all. And I think that's that's actually something you can see in some of Breillat's other work. But it did surprise me that it lacked a certain kind of construction that I expect from her work. But maybe that's symptomatic of where we're at. I think we're going to say this a lot with a lot of the directors we're talking about this festival, is that they're actually making films in a less interesting way than they did 10 years ago, in terms of the actual like visual material.
But there's still real worth there, and I still would recommend people to see it, because it's like, not only like Breillat completionist, but like it's an interesting story, and it's like
it's better than Bluebeard, I think. It's definitely like a good, definitely good Breillat film, a decent Breillat film.